2023, the anti-aging industry reached $67 billion. Botox injections in people under 30 increased by 400% in 5 years. The average Instagram user spends 53 hours per year editing their appearance in photos. These aren't vanity statistics. They're symptoms of a mass psychological crisis that Oscar Wilde diagnosed in 1890. We're not afraid of aging. We're afraid of becoming real. And there's a word for what happens when an entire generation makes a Faustian bargain with their own reflection: the Dorian Gray syndrome. The trade is simple. You get to look young forever. In exchange, something else starts rotting in the dark, and you won't know what you've lost until it's too late to get it back. There's a moment in the Picture of Dorian Gray when the protagonist stands before his portrait for the first time and experiences something like vertigo. The painter, Basil Hallward, has captured not just physical beauty, but temporal innocence, the face of someone who hasn't yet been marked by consequence. Lord Henry Wotton, the novel's philosopher devil, leans against the mantelpiece and speaks the words that will corrupt everything. Youth is the only thing worth having. When you find that you are growing old, you will become dreadfully bored with yourself. Realize your youth while you have it. And Dorian, looking between his own face in the mirror and its representation on canvas, understands for the first time that these two things will diverge, that the painting will remain while he decays. And he makes a wish that Wilde describes not as supernatural fancy, but as psychological fait accompli. If it were only the other way. If it were I who was to be always young, and the picture that was to grow old. The wish is granted, but not by magic, by mechanism, by the same psychological architecture that governs every filtered photograph, every edited caption, every curated moment of contemporary life. Dorian doesn't age because he's learned to split the self into presentation and accumulation. The face he shows the world remains pristine. The portrait, hidden in a locked attic room, begins to change. At first, subtly, a touch of cruelty around the mouth, a coldness in the eyes. Then more dramatically, the portrait ages not with the dignified weathering of time, but with something more disturbing. The visible accumulation of moral consequence. Every act of selfishness, every moment of cruelty, every person destroyed. The portrait records it all. And Dorian, beautiful and unmarked, continues his life as if consequence were something that happens to other people. Wilde published this novel in 1890, at the height of his own fame. He was 36 years old, the age when the puer fantasy begins to crack, when potential must calcify into actuality or remain forever abstract. He was the most celebrated wit in London, a man who turned his entire existence into aesthetic performance. His clothing, his speech patterns, his mannerisms, everything was curated. He'd made himself into a living work of art, and London society adored him for it. But behind the performance, in the locked rooms of his private life, something else was accumulating. His sexuality, his actual desires, his genuine self. These things couldn't be displayed. Victorian England would destroy him if they knew. So he lived split, public brilliance, private concealment. And the Picture of Dorian Gray is his attempt to map that terrain, to describe what happens when the gap between presentation and reality becomes unbridgeable. The novel operates on a principle that Carl Jung would later formalize as shadow psychology. Jung, working in the early 20th century, proposed that the psyche maintains wholeness through integration. Conscious ego must acknowledge and incorporate the unconscious shadow, or the split between them creates pathology. The shadow isn't merely negative qualities we've disowned. It's everything that doesn't fit the persona we're trying to maintain. For Dorian, the persona is eternal youth and aesthetic perfection. The shadow is everything that contradicts this: aging, moral decay, the weight of consequence. And rather than integrating these elements, rather than allowing his face to show what his life has been, he performs a psychic vivisection. He splits himself completely. Persona and shadow occupy different planes of reality, and both begin to deteriorate in their separation. This is what's happening now, at scale, in ways Wilde couldn't have imagined, but somehow predicted with eerie precision. Every Instagram profile is a portrait in the attic, not the public image. The public image is Dorian's unchanging face. The portrait is what you're actually becoming while the performance continues. It's the camera roll full of photos you'll never post, the screenshots of arguments you'll never reference publicly, the evidence of the life that's actually being lived while the curated version accumulates likes and comments, and the hollow validation of people who've never seen you as you actually are. When Dorian first notices the portrait changing, just a touch of cruelty around the painted mouth, his reaction is telling. He doesn't feel guilt, he feels fascination. Wilde writes, "He grew more and more enamored of his own beauty, more and more interested in the corruption of his own soul. The portrait becomes the only honest relationship in his life. Everything else is performance. His lovers see the beautiful surface. His friends see the charming aesthete. But the portrait sees what he's becoming. And there's something almost erotic in this relationship with his own hidden truth. He visits the attic room frequently, sometimes after moments of particular cruelty, to see how the portrait has changed, to catalogue the damage, to witness the accumulation that his face refuses to show. This is the mechanism of contemporary dissociation. The split isn't between good self and bad self. It's between performed self and actual self. Between the version that exists for public consumption and the version that accumulates in private. And the more energy devoted to maintaining the performance, the more the actual self recedes. Not into virtue or vice particularly, but into something worse, into unreality, into the sensation of watching your own life from somewhere slightly behind your own eyes, of feeling like an actor in a movie about your existence rather than a person actually existing. Jung called this state of perpetual becoming, this refusal to solidify into anything definite, the pure aeternus, the eternal child. And it's worth understanding this concept in depth, because it's the psychological water we're all swimming in now. The puer isn't simply immature. The puer is someone who's made a specific ontological choice to remain potential rather than become actual, to keep all possibilities alive rather than commit to any particular path. The puer at 35 still talks about what he's thinking about doing with his life, still frames every commitment as temporary, still experiences choice not as liberation but as trap, because to choose one thing is to kill all the other possible versions of yourself, and the puer would rather die than become specific. Dorian Gray is the puer's patron saint. His eternal youth isn't just physical, it's psychological. He never develops, never deepens, never allows experience to change him. He accumulates experiences, travel, art, love affairs, eventually murder, but remains fundamentally the same. And Wilde shows us, with surgical precision, that this unchanging quality isn't innocence preserved. It's arrested development calcified into pathology. Dorian at 40 behaves exactly as Dorian at 20, but now the behavior reads differently. What was charming irresponsibility becomes cruelty. What was youthful experimentation becomes predatory manipulation. The same actions, but time has moved around them, and context has shifted, and what was once forgivable becomes monstrous. There's a scene midway through the novel where Dorian attends a dinner party. Wilde describes his performance with uncomfortable clarity. He played with the idea and grew willful, tossed it into the air and transformed it, let it escape and recaptured it, made it iridescent with fancy and winged it with paradox. He's brilliant. Everyone at the table is enchanted. But Wilde gives us access to Dorian's interior experience during this performance. The praise of folly, as he went on, soared into a philosophy, and philosophy herself became young. Note the construction. Philosophy becomes young, not wise, not deep, but young. Dorian's brilliance is all surface, verbal pyrotechnics without substance. And he knows this. The whole performance is hollow. He's saying things because they sound impressive, not because they mean anything. And when the party ends, he goes home and looks at the portrait, and the portrait has changed again. Not because he's done something dramatically evil, because he's performed existence rather than lived it, and the portrait records the cost. This is the trap of the pure psychology. It looks like freedom, this refusal to commit, this perpetual openness to possibility, but it's actually paralysis. The person who won't commit to a relationship because maybe someone better is out there isn't free. They're trapped in the waiting room of their own life. The person who won't commit to a career because they're keeping options open isn't preserving potential. They're avoiding the risk of discovering their actual limitations. And time doesn't wait for you to decide. Time is making you something, whether you choose or not. The question is only whether you're conscious of what you're becoming. In his personal life, Wilde was living this exact contradiction. By 1891, when he published Dorian Gray, he was married with 2 children, but his primary emotional and erotic life was with young men, particularly Lord Alfred Douglas. He was maintaining a public persona of respectable married writer, while his private life grew increasingly reckless. The split between presentation and reality was widening, and he seems to have known, on some level, that this couldn't continue indefinitely. The novel is filled with moments of almost prophetic self-knowledge. Lord Henry tells Dorian, the only way to get rid of a temptation is to yield to it. Resist it, and your soul grows sick with longing for the things it has forbidden to itself. Wilde wrote this as aesthetic philosophy, but he was also writing his own rationalization for living split, for maintaining the respectable facade while yielding to temptations that Victorian England considered criminal. The portrait in the novel functions as what Jung would later theorize as the shadow made visible. Jung argued that everything we repress, everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves, doesn't disappear. It accumulates in the unconscious as the shadow, a kind of second personality that contains all the qualities incompatible with our conscious self-image. And the shadow grows stronger the more it's repressed. It becomes autonomous. It begins to act on its own. In severe cases, it can take over completely. And Jung believed that the only way to prevent this was through integration, through consciously acknowledging the shadow as part of the self, not acting on every shadow impulse, but recognizing them as yours, owning the full spectrum of what you are. Dorian never does this. He keeps the portrait locked away. He hides the shadow in the attic and maintains the beautiful persona. And Wilde shows us, with accumulating horror, what this costs. Dorian becomes progressively more cruel, more callous, more disconnected from genuine feeling. He seduces Sybil Vane, a young actress, and she falls completely in love with him. Her acting had been brilliant, but once she experiences real love, she can no longer act. She tells Dorian, "Before I knew you, acting was the one reality of my life. It was only in the theatre that I lived. But you have made me understand what love really is. My love has made me hate everything false." And Dorian, hearing this, is revolted. He doesn't want her real love. He wanted her performed passion, her acted emotion. When she gave him something genuine, something unfiltered, he abandoned her. She kills herself that night. And when Dorian learns of her death, he feels something for approximately 5 minutes before Lord Henry talks him into aestheticizing it. It has the terrible beauty of a Greek tragedy in which I took a great part, but by which I have not been wounded. This is the pure's relationship to consequence. Experience must be converted into aesthetic appreciation to remain tolerable. Real emotion must be transmuted into performance to avoid its weight. Sybil's suicide becomes, in Lord Henry's framing, and Dorian's acceptance, a work of art, rather than a human catastrophe. And this reframing is what allows Dorian to move on unchanged. And the portrait, Wilde tells us, changes that night. The cruelty around the mouth deepens. The eyes take on something cold. The shadow is recording what the persona refuses to acknowledge. We do this constantly now. Every tragedy scrolled past on social media. Every moment of genuine suffering converted into content, into something to react to performatively rather than feel authentically. The architecture of digital life makes this conversion automatic. You see a disaster, a famine, a war crime, and for a split second, something real threatens to break through. Horror, grief, the vertigo of recognizing genuine suffering. But the scroll continues, the feed moves, and the feeling is replaced by the next stimulus. And what accumulates isn't callousness exactly. It's something more subtle, the growing sense that nothing is quite real anymore, that suffering and joy and love and death are all just content, just images moving across a screen, just performances in an endless theatre. Jung believed that this kind of dissociation, this split between conscious persona and unconscious shadow, inevitably leads to psychological crisis, usually in midlife, usually triggered by something that forces confrontation with the shadow, a health crisis that makes mortality undeniable, a divorce that reveals the gap between the performed relationship and the actual one, a professional failure that punctures the narrative of success. Something breaks through, and suddenly the person is forced to look at what they've been hiding in the attic, and what they find there is often unrecognizable. Years of accumulated choices and repressions and compromises have created something monstrous, not evil necessarily, but unintegrated, disowned, autonomous. The cliché of the midlife crisis, the sports car, the younger lover, the dramatic life change, is actually a crisis of shadow, confrontation gone wrong. The person looks at what they've become, and rather than integrating it, tries to destroy it, tries to return to youth, tries to recover the moment before consequence. But you can't go backward. Time has already moved. The portrait has already changed. And the attempt to destroy what's been accumulated only creates more damage. Wilde himself experienced this. In 1895, 4 years after publishing Dorian Gray, he was prosecuted for gross indecency, Victorian legal language for homosexual acts. Lord Alfred Douglas's father, the Marquess of Queensberry, had publicly accused Wilde of sodomy. And rather than fleeing England, rather than accepting the private reality of his life, Wilde sued for libel. He tried to maintain the performance even as it was collapsing. The trial exposed everything he'd been hiding. His relationships with young men, his double life, the gap between public persona and private reality. He was convicted and sentenced to 2 years of hard labor. The imprisonment destroyed him physically and psychologically. His health collapsed. His reputation evaporated. His wife took their children and changed their surname. Everything he'd built through performance was erased. And here's what's devastating. Wilde wrote Dorian Gray as a warning to himself. Lord Henry's aphorisms, his philosophy of yielding to temptation, his belief that appearance is all that matters. These were Wilde's own thoughts. The novel is him trying to think through the consequences of living split, trying to understand what happens when presentation and reality diverge completely. And he couldn't stop himself. Even knowing the danger, even having mapped it novelistically, he continued widening the gap, continued performing Oscar Wilde while hiding the person underneath. And when the portrait was finally revealed, when his private life became public, he shattered. There's a concept in existential philosophy developed by Sartre called mauvaise foi, bad faith. It describes the human tendency to lie to ourselves about our own freedom, to pretend that we have no choice, that circumstances have determined our path, that we're not responsible for who we've become. Bad faith is how we avoid the anxiety of freedom. If you're not responsible, you can't be blamed for failure. If you had no choice, you don't have to feel the weight of the choices you actually made. And the puer lives in perpetual bad faith. The eternal child says, I haven't committed because the right opportunity hasn't appeared yet. I haven't become anything definite because I'm still exploring. I'm not avoiding choice, I'm preserving possibility. But this is a lie. Every moment of non-choosing is a choice. Every day spent avoiding commitment is a day spent becoming someone who avoids commitment. The portrait is changing whether you look at it or not. Dorian's bad faith is absolute. Every time he looks at the portrait and sees it growing more corrupt, more hideous, he has a moment of recognition. He knows what he's becoming, but he chooses to look away, to go back downstairs and continue the performance, to maintain the beautiful surface and ignore what's rotting underneath. And Wilde shows us that this choice, this refusal to integrate the shadow, this insistence on living split, doesn't preserve innocence. It creates monstrosity, not because Dorian becomes actively evil, because he becomes progressively more hollow, more disconnected, more like an automaton going through the motions of being human without actually feeling anything. There's a crucial moment late in the novel when Dorian decides to change. He's destroyed so many people, Sybil Vane, Basil Hallward, whom he murders when the painter discovers the portrait, countless others damaged by his callous charm, and he decides to try being good. He meets a young woman in the country, a simple village girl who falls in love with him, and for once, he doesn't seduce her. He tells himself, I want to be good, I want to change. And he feels proud of this restraint. He goes back to London and looks at the portrait, expecting to see some improvement, some sign that his decision has reversed the corruption and the portrait has changed. But not for the better. The face has become more hypocritical, more smug, because his restraint wasn't genuine. It was another performance, another way of maintaining the beautiful surface. He didn't spare the girl out of compassion. He spared her to feel virtuous, to prove to himself that he could still choose goodness. And the portrait records the truth, that performative virtue is another form of vanity. This is the trap that so much contemporary discourse about authenticity falls into. The idea that if you just post your real self, if you share your struggles, your flaws, your unfiltered moments, You'll escape the performance trap. But performed authenticity is still performance. Curated vulnerability is still curation. The moment you're sharing your real self for public consumption, for validation, for proof that you're authentic, it stops being real. It becomes another mask, another way to control how you're seen. And the portrait keeps changing because the mechanism hasn't shifted. You're still split, still maintaining a gap between the version you show and the version you're actually becoming. Jung argued that integration of the shadow isn't about confession or public display. It's about private acknowledgement, about looking at the parts of yourself that don't fit your self-image and saying, "This is also me," not broadcasting it, not performing it, just owning it internally. The integrated person doesn't need to hide parts of themselves, but they also don't need to display everything. They're whole, conscious of their contradictions, comfortable with their limitations, and crucially, still aging, still being marked by time, still accumulating the visible evidence of having lived. This is what Dorian can't tolerate. Not just the moral corruption, he actually seems to enjoy cataloguing that in the portrait. What he can't tolerate is aging. The novel makes this clear in the opening chapters. His horror at the portrait aging isn't about virtue, it's about time. Lord Henry plants the seed. You have only a few years in which to live really, perfectly, and fully. When your youth goes, your beauty will go with it. And then you will suddenly discover that there are no triumphs left for you. And Dorian becomes obsessed with this, with the idea that his value expires, that once he's no longer young, he's no longer worth anything, and the portrait becomes a record not primarily of sin, but of time. Every year that passes without marking his face is a year he's cheated mortality, and every change in the portrait is evidence that time is winning anyway. This is the core terror that drives contemporary anti-aging obsession. Not fear of death exactly, fear of irrelevance, fear that your value is contingent on youth, that once you're visibly marked by time, you'll be discarded. And this fear is rooted in something real. Markets do favor youth. Social media algorithms do favor youth. Sexual marketplaces do favor youth. The fear isn't irrational, but the response to it, trying to stop time, trying to remain perpetually young, is a form of madness. Because time doesn't stop. Biology doesn't care about your Botox. And the gap between your actual age and your presented age creates a cognitive dissonance that manifests as the dissociation so many people report feeling now. The sense of not quite inhabiting your own life, of watching yourself from outside, of being not quite real. In Japanese aesthetics, there's a principle called Wabi-sabi, the finding of beauty in imperfection, impermanence, and incompleteness. A tea bowl with a crack is more valuable than a perfect one, because the crack is evidence of use, of history, of time. The crack is what makes it real. And this principle extends to faces, bodies, lives. A face marked by time is more interesting than a smooth face because the marks are a record. Laugh lines around the eyes mean you've laughed. Furrows in the forehead mean you've worried, which means you've cared about something enough to be stressed by it. Grey hair means you've survived years. These marks aren't flaws, they're data, evidence that you've been here. That time has passed through you and left proof. But we've lost this understanding. We've been trained to see aging as decay rather than accumulation, as loss rather than gain. And this reframing has consequences. When you're trying to erase the marks of time, you're not preserving youth. You're creating a mask, and the mask requires maintenance. Energy that could go into living goes into maintaining the performance. into looking like you're not aging, into hiding the evidence of time. And what accumulates behind the mask isn't beautiful youth. It's exhaustion, resentment, the growing sense that you're performing a version of yourself that has less and less to do with who you actually are. Wilde understood masks. His entire public life was a performance. He cultivated specific mannerisms, specific ways of speaking, specific poses. He turned himself into Oscar Wilde, a character he played in public, and the performance was brilliant. People couldn't get enough of him. His plays were hits. His conversation was legendary, but the mask was exhausting. In his letters to close friends, he writes about the fatigue of maintaining the persona, about moments when he couldn't remember who he actually was underneath all the performance. And after his imprisonment, after the mask was torn off, and he was revealed as just a human being, flawed, aging, suffering, he couldn't put it back on. He tried. In his final years in Paris, he tried to be witty Oscar Wilde again, but it rang hollow. Everyone could see through it now. The portrait had been revealed. There's a profound loneliness in living split, in maintaining a gap between how you're seen and who you are, because no one is actually relating to you. They're relating to the performance. And the more successful the performance, the more complete the loneliness. Dorian experiences this throughout the novel. He has countless acquaintances, lovers, admirers, but no genuine relationships, because no one sees him. They see the beautiful, unchanging face. They see the charming aesthete, but the person who's looking at the portrait in the attic, who's watching himself corrupt, who's experiencing the vertigo of living split, that person is completely alone. And there's a passage where Wilde gives us access to this loneliness. He felt that he had no right to mar by vulgar crimes the perfection of his life. He wanted to be clean, to be rid of those terrible things that had fastened upon him. Note the construction. Terrible things that had fastened upon him, as if the consequences of his choices are external to him, as if he's a victim of his own actions rather than their author. This is the disorientation of complete dissociation. The shadow has become so split off that it feels like a separate entity. Jung warned that this level of dissociation, if not addressed, leads to psychological fragmentation. The conscious ego and the unconscious shadow become so divorced that they function as separate personalities, and eventually one of them takes over. Either the shadow breaks through, usually in destructive ways, through addiction or violence or complete breakdown, or the ego becomes entirely automated, maintaining the persona without anyone actually being home. And both outcomes are forms of death. The person stops existing as an integrated whole. They become either the monster in the attic or the beautiful mask over nothing. This is what happens to Dorian in the novel's final act. He's lived split for so long that he's no longer sure which version is real. Is he the beautiful young man everyone sees, or is he the corrupt monster shown in the portrait? And Wilde suggests that the question is malformed. Neither version is real, or both are real. The split itself has become his reality. He is the gap, the distance between image and truth, and this gap is uninhabitable. You can't live there. You can only maintain the performance until it collapses. The collapse comes when Basil Hallward, the painter who created the original portrait, confronts Dorian. Basil has heard rumors about Dorian's life, about people he's destroyed, about cruelty and vice. But he can't reconcile these rumors with the beautiful, unchanging face he sees. So he tells Dorian, "I want you to explain to me why you have so horrible an influence over people. Why a man like the Duke of Berwick leaves the room when you enter it. Why your friendship is so fatal to young men. There are things said about you that I cannot believe. And Dorian, in a moment of terrible honesty, takes Basil to the attic and shows him the portrait. Wilde describes Basil's reaction with clinical precision. An exclamation of horror broke from the painter's lips as he saw in the dim light the hideous face on the canvas grinning at him. And then something crucial happens. Basil doesn't see the portrait as supernatural curse. He sees it as spiritual X-ray. He tells Dorian, "This is the face of a satyr. It is the face of my soul." And Dorian responds, "It is the face of my soul." The portrait isn't showing what Dorian has done. It's showing what he's become. The accumulated weight of choices, the moral consequences of living split, the cost of refusing integration. And Basil, understanding this, tries to pray, tries to get Dorian to pray, to seek redemption. And Dorian, looking at Basil with something like hatred, picks up a knife and kills him. This is the moment when the shadow takes over completely. Dorian has spent years maintaining the split, keeping the monster locked away. But when the monster is revealed, when someone else sees what Dorian actually is, the only response is to destroy the witness, not out of calculated evil, out of psychic necessity. The performance requires that no one see the portrait, that the truth remain hidden, and anyone who threatens this requirement must be eliminated. And after the murder, Dorian feels nothing. The dissociation is complete. He looks at Basil's body and thinks about how to dispose of it, about who might help him, about whether this will leave any mark. And he never once experiences guilt or horror or grief, because to feel those things would require being present. And he hasn't been present in years. He's been maintaining a performance, and the performance continues. We're all capable of this level of dissociation, not murder necessarily, but the progressive disconnection from our own lives. The way you can go through entire days without being present, performing your job, your relationships, your social media persona, saying the right things, making the right gestures, maintaining the right image, but not actually being there, watching yourself from somewhere slightly outside your own body. And this isn't occasional distraction. This is chronic depersonalization, the feeling that you're not quite real, that your life is happening to someone else and you're just observing it. Jung believed that this state is the psyche's defense mechanism against unbearable contradiction. When the gap between who you're supposed to be and who you actually are becomes too wide, presence becomes intolerable. So you split off. You become the performance. And the actual self, the one that doesn't fit the image, gets locked away. And the longer this continues, the more the actual self deteriorates in isolation. Not from moral corruption, particularly, from lack of light, from lack of acknowledgement, from being hidden. There's a concept in phenomenology developed by Heidegger about the difference between authentic and inauthentic existence. Inauthentic existence is what Heidegger called das Man, the they self. It's living according to what one does. One goes to this school. One pursues this career. One presents themselves this way. The they self is socially determined. It's the accumulation of external expectations and cultural scripts, and everyone exists partially and as man. We're social creatures. We need shared frameworks. But authentic existence requires moments of individuation, moments when you break from das Man and choose based on your own confrontation with existence, based on your own awareness of mortality, limitation, and freedom. Dorian never achieves this. He lives entirely in das Man. entirely in the mode of what one does when one is beautiful and young and has unlimited freedom. Lord Henry teaches him this philosophy explicitly: never marry at all. Men marry because they are tired, women because they are curious. Both are disappointed. The only way to get rid of a temptation is to yield to it. I can sympathize with everything except suffering. I cannot sympathize with that. These aren't insights. They're scripts. They're what the aesthetic philosophy of the 1890s said one should believe, and Dorian adopts them completely, never questions them, never tests them against his actual experience. He becomes the perfect exemplar of inauthentic existence, living according to theory rather than reality. And the cost is that he never becomes real himself. This is what's happening at scale in contemporary life. We're all living in Das Man, in the mode of what one does. One curates their Instagram. One builds their personal brand. One optimizes their life for presentation. And these scripts are so pervasive, so naturalized, that they don't feel like scripts. They feel like just how life is. But they're not. They're choices we've made collectively. And the cost is authenticity. The cost is presence. The cost is the feeling of actually inhabiting your own existence. Heidegger believed that authentic existence requires confronting what he called Sein zum Tode, being toward death, the recognition that you're going to die, that your time is finite, that every choice forecloses other possibilities. And this recognition creates anxiety, but it also creates urgency, creates the possibility of choosing based on what actually matters rather than what one is supposed to do. And most people avoid this confrontation. Most people stay in das Man, following scripts, maintaining performances, never quite becoming themselves. Dorian tries to avoid this confrontation completely. His eternal youth is an attempt to escape temporality, to live outside of time, to never have to face the fact that choices have consequences, and time is finite, and eventually you die. But the portrait makes this impossible. The portrait is aging, even though Dorian isn't. And every time he looks at it, he's confronted with his own Sein zum Tode, with the fact that time is passing, that he's becoming something, that mortality is unavoidable. And rather than letting this transform him, rather than letting the recognition of death create authentic choice, he hides it. He locks the portrait away and pretends time has stopped. But time hasn't stopped. Time is accumulating in the portrait. And what accumulates isn't just moral corruption, it's temporal reality. The portrait at the end of the novel is described as withered, aged, hideous. It shows Dorian as he would be if he'd aged naturally, plus the accumulated weight of his choices. And when Dorian finally confronts it in the novel's climax, when he can't maintain the split anymore, his response is telling. He doesn't accept it. He doesn't integrate it. He tries to destroy it. Wilde describes the scene with nightmare precision. Dorian is alone in the house. Everyone else is gone. He goes to the attic, looks at the portrait, and he feels rage. Not at himself, at the portrait, at the evidence. He thinks, it had been like conscience to him. Yes, it had been conscience. He would destroy it. And he picks up the same knife he used to kill Basil Hallward and stabs the portrait through the heart. The servants hear a scream. They rush upstairs. They find the portrait hanging on the wall, pristine and perfect, showing Dorian Gray as he was at 20 years old. Beautiful, innocent, unmarked. And on the floor, there's a corpse, withered and aged and hideous, with a knife in its heart. They recognize him only by his jewelry. It's Dorian, When he tried to destroy the portrait, when he tried to destroy the truth, he destroyed himself, because he was the portrait. The beautiful face was always just a shell. The portrait was what was real. This is Wilde's thesis. The thing you're hiding in the attic isn't separate from you. It is you. The shadow isn't something external. It's the disowned parts of yourself. And when you try to destroy it, when you try to eliminate the parts of yourself that don't fit the image, you're committing a kind of suicide. Not dramatic, gradual. You're killing off the parts of yourself that are real in favor of maintaining a performance. And eventually, there's nothing left but the performance. Just a beautiful surface over nothing. And when the performance finally collapses, when you can't maintain it anymore, what remains is the accumulated truth you've been hiding. And it's unrecognizable because you've refused to look at it for so long. Jung spent his career arguing that the only alternative to this is integration, is turning around and looking at the shadow, acknowledging it as yours, not acting on every shadow impulse. That would be chaos. But recognizing that the impulses exist, that the parts of yourself you've disowned are still part of yourself. That wholeness requires accepting contradiction. And this process, which Jung called individualization, is painful. It requires admitting things about yourself you don't want to admit, requires giving up the comforting stories about who you are, requires accepting limitation and failure, and the marks that time has left on you. But the alternative is what happened to Dorian, is what happened to Wilde, is what's happening to everyone who's trying to maintain a split between image and reality. The split gets wider, the performance gets more exhausting, the actual self deteriorates in isolation, and eventually, either the shadow breaks through, usually destructively, or the person fragments completely, becomes a collection of performances with no one home, becomes the beautiful mask over nothing. Wilde died in 1900, 3 years after his release from prison. He was 46 years old. His body was ravaged by illness, his reputation destroyed. His wife had taken his children and changed their surname to escape association with him. He was living in a cheap Paris hotel room under an assumed name. And in his final letters, he writes about the experience of having the mask torn off, of being revealed, of having the portrait shown to the world. And there's something strange in these letters, not the bitterness you'd expect, but something like relief. He writes to a friend, "I don't regret for a single moment having lived for pleasure. I did it to the full, as one should do everything one does. There was no pleasure I did not experience. But then, I forgot that every little action of the common day makes or unmakes character, and that therefore what one has done in the secret chamber, one has someday to cry aloud from the housetops." The portrait was finally visible. The secret chamber had been opened, and everyone could see what he'd been hiding. And yes, it destroyed him socially and financially, but it also ended the performance. He didn't have to maintain Oscar Wilde anymore. He could just be a person, aging and dying and human. And in his final photographs, there's something in his face that wasn't there before. The wit is gone. The pose is gone. But there's a kind of presence, like he's actually there, behind his eyes, for the first time in years. This is what integration looks like. Not triumph, not redemption, just presence, just the end of the split. The portrait and the person finally converging. And it's not beautiful, it's just real. And real is the only thing that survives. Real is the only thing that doesn't disappear when the performance ends. The Picture of Dorian Gray ends with ambiguity. Is the portrait supernatural? Or is it psychological? Is Dorian killed by magic? Or by the psychic impossibility of destroying your own shadow? Wilde doesn't answer definitively, but the question itself is the point. Whether you believe in literal magic or not, the mechanism is the same. When you split yourself, when you maintain a perfect image while hiding what you're actually becoming, the split eventually kills you. Not metaphorically. Actually, maybe not physically, but psychologically, spiritually. The parts of you that are real atrophy. The performance becomes automated, and you stop existing as a person and become a function, a role, a collection of gestures. And this is what's happening now. Not to everyone, not all at once, but to enough people that it's become the water we swim in, the default state, the sense that no one is quite real anymore, that everyone is performing. That genuine connection is rare because genuine presence is rare, because everyone has split themselves into public persona and hidden truth, and the hidden truth is rotting in the attic, while the public persona gets more polished and more exhausting to maintain. And the question isn't how to fix this. There's no fix. The question is whether you're willing to look at what's in the attic, whether you're willing to bring the portrait downstairs, whether you're willing to let your face finally show what your life has been, to let the image and the reality converge, to stop performing and accept what you've become, which includes the aging, the failures, the marks of time, the evidence that you're not infinite potential anymore, but something specific and limited and real. This won't make you young again. That was never possible, but it might make you whole. And whole is the only thing that doesn't fragment under pressure. Whole is the only thing that can actually be present, actually connect, actually live instead of performing life. Wilde never managed this in time. He tried in those final years, but the split was too deep. The damage was too extensive. He died still trying to be Oscar Wilde, still performing wit even as his body failed. But he left us the map. He left us Dorian Gray. He left us the warning. And the warning is this: you can maintain the performance for years, decades even. You can keep the portrait hidden, keep the beautiful surface unmarked, but the portrait is still changing. Time is still moving. And eventually, you're going to have to confront what you've become while you were pretending to be something else. And when that confrontation comes, when you finally go up to the attic and look at what's been accumulating there in the dark, you're going to have to choose. Are you going to do what Dorian did? Are you going to try to destroy the truth to preserve the image? Or are you going to do what Dorian couldn't? Are you going to look at the portrait and say, this is me, this is what I've become, and I'm going to stop hiding it? There's no guarantee that integration will save you. Wilde achieved it too late. But there's a guarantee that refusing integration will destroy you, slowly, quietly, through dissociation and emptiness and the progressive sense that you're not quite real anymore, that your life is happening to someone else, that you're just watching. The portrait is in the attic. You know where it is. You've always known, and it's waiting for you to look at it, not to destroy it, not to fix it, just to acknowledge it, to bring it into the light, to let the image and the reality finally be the same thing. And that's where this ends. Not with an answer, not with a solution, just with a question that Wilde asked 135 years ago, and that's more urgent now than it's ever been. Would you rather be beautiful and hollow, or real and marked? Would you rather maintain the image and lose yourself, or reveal the portrait and become whole? Dorian chose the image, and it killed him. Wilde chose the image, and it killed him too. And every day, in small ways, we're all making the same choice. Every filtered photo, every curated moment, every time we hide what we're actually feeling to maintain the performance, we're choosing the image over the reality, the mask over the face, the beautiful lie over the ugly truth, and the portrait keeps changing. Whether we look at it or not, time is still moving, and eventually, we're going to have to look